The night I texted my family to take my name off every loan. My phone exploded like I had set off another IED. Not one of them asked if I could still feel my legs. They only wanted to know if I could still sign. They thought the wheelchair made me weaker. They had no idea I had come home trained to fight wars they could not even see, especially the one inside my own house. My name is Kinsley Graham. I am 32 years old, and until 3 months ago, I was a ghost for the United States government, operating in shadows where the sand turns to glass and the air smells like burning diesel. Now, I am just a tenant in room 304 at the Riverside Veteran Recovery Center. The space smells of industrial bleach and lemon floor wax, a scent that tries too hard to mask the underlying odor of despair and stale cafeteria coffee. It is 2 a.m. The hallway outside my door is quiet, save for the rhythmic squeak of a nurse making rounds in rubber-soled shoes. Inside my room, however, the silence is being murdered by a buzzing that vibrates through the metal frame of my bed and rattles my teeth. It is my phone. It is sitting on the bedside table, a small black rectangle that has suddenly become the most dangerous object in the room. The screen lights up the darkness in violent, strobing flashes, illuminating the chrome rims of the wheelchair parked next to my bed. That chair is a sleek, titanium beast, lightweight and expensive, but in the harsh blue light of the notifications, it looks like a cage. It reflects the light back at me, a constant, unblinking eye reminding me that my body has been reclassified. I am no longer an asset. I am an inventory item with damage. The phone buzzes again, and again, and again. It is the family group chat. For 7 months, while I was deployed on a classified rotation with the Maritime Strategic Response Group, this chat was a graveyard. There were no messages asking if I was safe. There were no photos of Sunday dinners I was missing. There was just digital silence, a void where a family should be. But tonight, that silence has been replaced by a panic so loud I can almost hear their voices screaming through the glass screen. The notifications are piling up like sandbags. 17 missed calls, 42 text messages. They are coming from my father, my mother, my younger brother Logan, and 2 cousins who usually only remember I exist when they need a cosigner for a used car. Hovering above this chaotic stream of demands is the grenade I threw into their living room exactly 4 hours ago. It was a simple message, typed out with thumbs that still have calluses from gripping a carbine. Even if the rest of me is broken, I wrote, "Remove my name from every family loan. Effective today." That was it. No explanations, no apologies, no softening the blow with emojis or promises to talk later. Just a direct order. The kind I was trained to give when hesitation meant body bags. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling tiles, counting the perforations, 112 in the row directly above my head. My arms are crossed over my chest. They feel heavy, dense with the new muscle I have built over the last few weeks of aggressive physical therapy. My triceps are rock hard, swollen from lifting my own dead weight in and out of chairs, in and out of showers, in and out of a life I used to recognize. But my legs are quiet. I look down the length of the thin hospital sheet. I can see the shape of them, the contours of my knees and feet, but the signal is cut. It is like looking at a photograph of someone else. There is no hum of electricity, no twitch of a nerve, no ache of a muscle needing to stretch, just silence, a heavy concrete silence that stops right at my lumbar spine. It is a strange thing, to look at a part of yourself and feel absolutely nothing, as if that part of you has already died and been buried, but the rest of you is forced to drag the tombstone around. The phone vibrates so hard it dances a half-inch to the left. I turn my head and let my eyes focus on the preview bubbles popping up on the lock screen. My father, the man who taught me that a Graham never cries but always pays their dues, is at the top of the list. His message is not a greeting. It is not a prayer for my recovery. It is an audit. How much do you still have in savings? Below him, my mother, Dana Graham, the woman who used to tell the neighbors her daughter was traveling for work, because admitting I was in special operations made her nervous not for my safety, but for what the church ladies would think of a woman carrying a gun. Her message is shorter, sharper. Your benefits are still coming. Right then, there is Logan, my little brother. The golden boy who never had to leave Maple Ridge because leaving is hard, and staying where mom does your laundry is easy. He is 30 years old, but his text reads like it came from a teenager who just realized his allowance has been cut off. Do not be a jerk. Kinsley, do not ruin the family credit score just because you are having a bad day. A bad day. I let out a breath that sounds suspiciously like a laugh, though there is no humor in it. A bad day is when it rains during a training exercise. A bad day is when the chow hall runs out of coffee. Getting your spine rearranged by a roadside bomb in a province most Americans cannot find on a map is not a bad day. It is a life sentence. I scan the rest of the messages. They are all variations on the same frantic theme. Interest rates, mortgage payments, co-signed leases, the agricultural LLC that I supposedly own but have never seen. Not a single person has asked the questions that you would expect from a family who just found out their daughter was medevaced halfway across the world. No one asks, "Are you okay?" No one asks, "Are you in pain?" No one asks, "Will you walk again?" No one asks, "How bad is the injury?" The omission is so glaring, it feels like a physical blow. It hurts worse than the phantom burning I sometimes feel in my toes. They are panicking. Yes, but they are not panicked because I might be broken. They are panicked because their ATM has stopped dispensing cash. I am not a daughter to them right now. I am a failed investment. I am a resource that has suddenly become finite. My hand twitches toward the phone. It is pure muscle memory. The old Kinsley, the dutiful daughter from Indiana, would have picked up on the first ring. She would have apologized for worrying them. She would have transferred $500 to mom's account just to calm her down. She would have promised to sort out the paperwork for the bank in the morning. She would have swallowed her own blood to keep them fed. But the old Kinsley died in a flash of white light and red dust 3,000 miles away. I pull my hand back. I tuck it under the pillow. I decide to let the phone ring. This is my first real exercise in rehabilitation, and it has nothing to do with parallel bars or grip strength. This is an exercise in will. I am testing myself. Can I lie here, in the dark, while the people I share DNA with spiral into chaos, and simply do nothing? Can I watch the house catch fire and not rush in with a bucket of water, knowing that I am the one who struck the match? The vibration is annoying, a buzzing fly that won't die, but I force myself to breathe through it. In for 4 seconds, hold, for 4 seconds, out, for 4 seconds, tactical breathing. It keeps the heart rate down. It keeps the mind clear. It keeps the rage from boiling over into tears. I close my eyes, but the darkness behind my eyelids is not empty. It is filled with the faces of the men and women I served with. I see Miller, who pulled me out of the wreckage while his own arm was hanging by a thread. I see Captain Velez, who sat by my bedside in Germany for 18 hours straight, refusing to leave until I woke up, just so I would see a friendly face. That was family. That was blood. Spilled and shared. This, the buzzing phone. This is just a transaction. If you are wondering how a daughter gets to the point where she cuts off her own bloodline from her bank account, how she lies in a hospital bed listening to her parents beg for money while she cannot feel her own legs, we have to go back. We have to rewind the tape. I open my eyes and look at the foot of the bed again. My gaze drifts past the useless lumps under the blanket to the window. Outside, the night is heavy and black, but the security lights from the parking lot illuminate the flagpole near the entrance of the center. The flag is there, waving sluggishly in the humid night breeze. It is a symbol of a country that, for all its flaws, sent a plane to get me. It sent doctors to stitch me up. It sent checks to keep me alive. A grateful nation, they call it. Then the phone lights up again. Another text from Dad. We have a payment due on the 15th. You need to call the bank. Now. The contrast is sharp enough to cut skin. Outside, a nation that knows I gave everything. Inside, a phone that says I have not given enough. I promised myself I would not cry in this place. I have already shed enough tears in the sand. I am not telling you this story so you will feel sorry for the girl in the wheelchair. Pity is a currency I do not accept. It has no value here. I am telling you this because you need to understand the architecture of a betrayal. You need to understand that the bomb didn't just go off in Afghanistan. The fuse was lit in a kitchen in Indiana 20 years ago. I need to explain why. This time, I am not coming home with a checkbook and a smile. I am choosing a different weapon. I am choosing the law. I am choosing silence. I am choosing to let them drown in the debts they forged in my name. I watch the phone buzz one last time before the screen finally goes dark, exhausted by its own efforts. The room returns to shadow. The silence rushes back in, heavy and thick. I lay my hand on the metal rim of the wheelchair. It is cold, hard, and unyielding. Just like I have to be. They are probably sitting around the kitchen table right now, wondering what happened to me. They are probably telling themselves that the injury made me confused, or bitter, or scared. They are writing the narrative that suits them, the one where I am the victim and they are the worried saints. They thought I would roll back into their lives the same obedient daughter who left. But Afghanistan did not just take my legs, it burned away my obedience. To understand why I am currently lying in a hospital bed in Riverside, refusing to answer the phone while my father hyperventilates about a bank loan, you have to understand the soil I grew up in. I was raised in Maple Ridge, Indiana, a town that is less of a community and more of an inescapable gravitational pull. It is the kind of place where everyone knows your license plate number and exactly how much you owe on your truck. It is a flat, endless grid of cornfields and single-story houses, all centered around the Redline Foods corn processing plant. That factory was the beating heart of the town, and it was also the chain around my father's neck. My father spent 30 years at Redline Foods. He came home every single day smelling of sweet corn syrup and industrial grease. It was a smell that permeated everything in our house, the curtains, the carpet, even the food we ate. It was the smell of minimum wage survival. He would walk through the door, slump into his recliner, and turn on the television. Too exhausted to speak, but never too exhausted to remind us of how hard he worked to keep a roof over our heads. My mother was the bookkeeper, not professionally, though she did handle the registers part-time at the local grocery store, but her real job was managing the ledger of the Graham family existence. She was obsessed with bills. She treated the mailman like a harbinger of doom. Every envelope that arrived was opened with a surgical knife and a grimace. But more than the bills, she was obsessed with the Graham family credit score. To her, that 3-digit number was not just a financial metric, it was a measure of our soul. It was our honor. If the score dropped, it was a moral failing. If we were late on a payment, it was a sin against God and the neighbors. Then there was Logan. My brother is 2 years younger than me, but in our house, he was treated like the heir to a throne that did not exist. Logan was charming in a lazy, devastating way. He had a smile that could get him out of a speeding ticket and an inability to hold down a job that was truly pathological. He would get hired at a landscaping crew on Monday and quit by Thursday because his back hurt, or the boss was mean, or the sun was too bright. My parents never scolded him. When I brought home straight A's, they nodded and asked why I had not picked up an extra shift at the diner when Logan quit his job because he overslept 3 days in a row. They sighed and said, "He will figure it out. One day, he just needs to find his passion." I was the only one who looked at the cornfields of Maple Ridge and saw a cage. I was the only one who looked at the horizon and wanted to know what was on the other side of it. I was 12 years old when I first told my father I wanted to do something important. I wanted to build things, or fix things, or fight for things. I mentioned the military. My father laughed. It was a wet, hacking sound. He looked at me over the top of his beer can and said, "That is not a job for a girl. Kinsley, your job is to stay close. You marry decent. You help the family. You do not run off playing soldier." That was the seed. Stay close. Help the family. It was planted deep in my brain before I even knew what a mortgage was. They taught me that my existence was a support beam for the structure of their lives. I was not an individual. I was insurance. As I got older, The house became a pressure cooker. I was working 2 jobs while finishing high school, one at the library, one waitressing at the truck stop off the interstate. Every Friday, I put my tips on the kitchen table. My mother would count the crumpled bills with quick, greedy fingers, her eyes darting to the stack of unpaid notices on the counter. She never said thank you. She just said, "This will cover the electric." Good. But I had a secret. I was not just working. I was training. I ran 5 miles every morning before the sun came up, pounding the asphalt of the county roads while the rest of Maple Ridge slept. I did push-ups in the back of the library stacks. I studied mechanics and engineering manuals. I borrowed from the reference section. I was preparing. The war started in the kitchen during my senior year. I had requested information packets from several military academies and recruitment offices. I knew they had been mailed. I had tracked the dates, but they never arrived. For 3 weeks, I checked the mailbox every day, and every day it was empty. Then, one afternoon, I came home early from school because of a canceled assembly. I found my mother in the backyard, standing over a burning trash barrel. She was holding a thick, creamy envelope with a Department of Defense logo in the corner. I screamed. I did not mean to, but the sound ripped out of my throat. I ran to her and snatched the half-burned papers from the fire. It was my acceptance packet. She did not even look guilty. She looked self-righteous. She wiped the ash from her hands and said, "We are protecting you. Kinsley, you do not know what is out there. You belong here. Who is going to help us pay for the new roof if you are running around in the mud?" That was the moment the glass broke. I realized they did not want me to stay because they loved me. They wanted me to stay because they needed my labor. I spent the next 6 months in a cold war with my own parents. I reapplied. I forged the necessary parental consent signatures where I could, and where I could not. I waited until I turned 18. I did everything in secret. When the final acceptance letter came for the Maritime Strategic Response Group Selection Program, a pipeline so grueling most men washed out in week 1, I hid it in the lining of my winter coat. The day I left, there was no party. There were no balloons. My father stood in the driveway, watching me load my single duffel bag into a taxi I had paid for with 3 months of saved tips. He did not hug me. He leaned against the peeling siding of the house, crossed his arms, and delivered the curse that has rung in my ears for a decade. He said, "You will crawl back. You will crawl back when you realize nobody out there cares about you like we do. You think you are special. You are nothing without this family." I closed the taxi door and did not look back. The training was brutal. It was designed to break human beings down to their raw components and rebuild them as weapons. I spent days covered in mud, freezing in surf, carrying logs that weighed more than I did. I learned how to disassemble a rifle in the dark. I learned how to navigate by the stars. But the most important thing I learned was what a real family looked like. My squad mates were strangers from all over the country. There was a kid from the Bronx, a mechanic from Texas, a surfer from California. We had nothing in common except the mud and the mission. But when I sprained my ankle on a 12-mile ruck march, the Texan carried my pack for the last 3 miles so I would not get dropped. When I got sick with pneumonia during winter survival training, the girl from the Bronx slept by my bunk to make sure I kept breathing. They asked for nothing. They kept no ledger. Graduation day arrived 2 years later. It was a formal ceremony on a windy parade deck in Virginia. The families of the other graduates were there in droves. I saw fathers crying with pride, mothers holding up signs, little brothers wearing oversized hats. I scanned the bleachers until my eyes burned. I looked for the familiar slouch of my father or the nervous fidgeting of my mother. The stands were full, but my section was empty. I checked my phone. There was one message from my mother. "Send money when you can. Things are tight here. The transmission on the van is acting up." I put the phone away and stood at attention. I let the wind dry my eyes. That was the day I realized I was an orphan with living parents. Then came Afghanistan. For the next few years, my life was a series of deployments. I lived in shipping containers and tents. I ate dust for breakfast. I saw things that would make the residents of Maple Ridge vomit in terror. I lost hearing in my left ear from a firefight in the Korangal Valley. I lost friends whose names I still whisper when I cannot sleep. But through it all, the digital umbilical cord to Indiana remained attached, and it was hungry. Every time I got paid, the requests would start. It was never a demand. It was always a crisis. Dad hurt his back and cannot pick up overtime. Kinsley, we are 2 months behind on the mortgage. Logan has a great opportunity to start a delivery business, but he needs a vehicle, just a used truck. He will pay you back. The furnace died. It is freezing here. You do not want us to freeze, do you? I was making good money, hazard pay, combat pay, re-enlistment bonuses, and I had nowhere to spend it. I was living on a base where food and lodging were free. So, I sent it. I sent thousands. I sent tens of thousands. I bought the truck for Logan. He drove it for 3 months, then quit the delivery job because the hours interfered with his social life. He sold the truck and kept the cash. When I asked about it, Mom said, he needed the money to get by. Kinsley, don't be selfish. I paid off the mortgage arrears 3 separate times. I paid for a roof I did not live under. I paid for dental work for my aunt. I paid for groceries I would never eat. Every time I hit the transfer button on my banking app, I told myself this was the last time, but then I would hear my father's voice in my head, "You will crawl back," and I would send more, trying to prove him wrong. I was trying to buy their respect. I thought if I just gave enough, if I solved enough problems, they would finally look at me and say, "We are proud of you. You did good." But the praise never came. Only the receipts. I remember one specific night in Kandahar. It was winter, and the temperature had dropped to near zero. We were huddled around a heater in the team room, cleaning our gear after a 3-day patrol. My phone pinged. It was an email from my mother. No subject line. Just a photo of a new leather sectional sofa in our living room in Maple Ridge. Underneath, she had written, "Look what we got on sale. It fits the room perfectly. Can you wire $2,000 to cover the rest? We put it on the store credit card, and the interest is killing us." I looked at the photo. It looked warm. It looked comfortable. It looked like a home. And then I looked at my boots, caked in dried mud and someone else's blood. I looked at my hands, chapped and raw from the cold. I turned to my team leader, a gruff sergeant named Miller. I asked him, "Does your mom ask you for money?" He laughed and shook his head. "No, Graham. My mom sends me cookies and tells me to keep my head down. She would starve before she took a dime of my combat pay." That was when the crack in my chest started to widen. I realized I was not a hero to them. I was not a soldier. I was a resource. I was an oil well they had drilled, and they were pumping me dry before the lease ran out. I kept thinking if I just gave a little more, they would finally be proud. Turns out, I was only teaching them how much they could take. They were not saving the money I sent. They were expanding their lifestyle to match my income. They were living a middle-class fantasy on a special operations salary, and I was the one dodging bullets to pay for it. They promised, over and over, "We will pay you back when things settle, when Dad retires, when Logan's business takes off, when the settlement comes through." There was always a when, but when is a fairy tale word for people who do not want to face reality. There was no when. There was only, "Give me." I sat there in the cold desert night, staring at the picture of the sofa, and I transferred the money. I did it because I was weak. I did it because I was still that 12-year-old girl terrified that her father was right, that I was nothing without them. I did not know then that the real cost would not be the money. The real cost would be my name. While I was out there fighting for strangers, they were back home signing my signature on documents that would bind me to their failures forever. I did not know it then, but I was financing the very trap that would try to crush me when I finally came home, broken, on wheels, and no longer useful. The morning my life ended and restarted began with a deceptive amount of beauty. It was a Tuesday in early October, and the Afghan sun was already baking the armor plating of our vehicle, turning the interior into a convection oven. We were on a routine supply escort mission, rolling down a strip of hard-packed dirt that we had traversed a dozen times before. The mountains in the distance were jagged and purple against a sky that was so blue it looked like it had been painted on by a child. I was in the passenger seat, my rifle resting against my knee. The vibrations of the engine hummed through the soles of my boots, a familiar, comforting rattle that usually lulled me into a state of hyper-aware focus. I turned to Miller, who was driving. He was wearing his wraparound sunglasses and chewing on a piece of gum with the rhythmic intensity of a metronome. I keyed my mic and said that if we made it back to base before chow. I was going to FaceTime my mother. It was her birthday the next day. I told Miller I had sent her $300 to buy a new mixer she had been hinting about for 6 months. Miller laughed and told me I was a good kid. He said my mom was lucky to have a daughter who remembered things like mixers while dodging bullets. I smiled. I remember that smile perfectly, because it was the last genuine expression I would wear for a very long time. Then the world turned white. There was no sound at first. That is the thing the movies get wrong. They give you a boom. Reality gives you a vacuum. It felt like the atmosphere inside the truck had been sucked out instantly, replaced by a crushing, blinding pressure. The white light was not spiritual. It was violent. It was the color of magnesium burning at 1,000 degrees. Then came the sensation of flight, but not the graceful kind. It was the feeling of being inside a tin can that a giant had just kicked across a parking lot. When the sound finally caught up to the light, it was not a noise. It was a physical blow. It was the sound of the sky shattering. I landed. I do not know where or how hard, but I remember the smell, ozone, burning rubber, the copper tang of blood, and dust, so much dust it felt like I was breathing in the desert itself. My training took over before my brain could process the horror. It is a strange, robotic survival mechanism. My hands moved instantly. I checked my chest rig. I checked my rifle. I reached up to touch my helmet, verifying it was still strapped to my head. My upper body was a flurry of activity, adrenaline flooding my veins like ice water. I turned to check on Miller, but the smoke was too thick. I tried to push myself up, to scramble over the center console and drag him out. I planted my hands on the dashboard and pushed. My arms straightened, my shoulders engaged, but nothing happened. I looked down. I expected to see my legs trapped under crushed metal. I expected to see debris pinning me to the seat, but there was nothing holding me down. My legs were there, clad in the dusty camouflage pattern I had worn for 8 months. They looked fine. They looked like my legs, but they were silent. It is the only way I can describe it. Usually, your body has a hum. You can feel the tension in your thighs, the flex of an ankle, the pressure of your heel against the floor mat. But below my waist, the map of my body had been erased. It was as if someone had taken a pair of scissors and cut the connection cord. I sent the command, "Move, get up, push." The signal went out, and it vanished into a void. I screamed then. I did not scream because of the pain, though the pain was starting to bloom in my back like a red-hot flower. I screamed because I knew, with a terrifying, absolute certainty, that the Kinsley Graham who had climbed into that truck was gone. The next 48 hours were a blur of helicopter rotors, shouting voices, and the sterile, blinding lights of operating theaters. I was moved from a field hospital to Bagram, then to a transport plane that vibrated all the way to Germany, and finally, across the Atlantic to the United States. I floated in and out of consciousness, riding waves of morphine that dulled the edges of the world but could not silence the voice in my head. Doctors hovered over me, their faces masked, their voices low and serious. They used words like severe spinal trauma and burst fracture. They talked about the T12 vertebrae as if it were a mechanical part that had failed. They used phrases like unlikely to regain full function and significant mobility impairment. They danced around the word never. They were careful not to steal my hope, but they certainly didn't hand me any. But as I lay there, staring at the beige tiles of a hospital ceiling in Maryland, a sickening thought clawed its way through the drug haze. It wasn't about walking. It wasn't about running. It wasn't about whether I would ever dance at a wedding or hike a trail. The thought was, what are they going to say about the disability check? I felt a surge of bile in my throat. I was lying in a hospital bed, my spine held together with rods and screws, my career in ashes, And my first coherent panic was about my family's reaction to my income potential. I wondered if the disability payments would match my combat pay. I wondered how I would explain to my father that I could no longer pick up extra hazard shifts. I wondered if my mother would be disappointed that the steady stream of cash transfers might dry up. I hated myself for thinking it. I hated them for planting the instinct so deep in my psyche that it survived a bomb blast. 2 weeks later, I was transferred to the Riverside Veteran Recovery Center. Riverside was a different kind of battlefield. It smelled of industrial antiseptic, cheap cafeteria coffee, and unwashed hair. The soundtrack of the place was the squeak of rubber tires on linoleum and the grunt of exertion. It was a warehouse for broken toys, a place where the government tried to repair what it had shattered. My room was small, with a window that looked out over a parking lot. My days were measured in inches. I had to relearn everything. I had to learn how to drag my body from the bed to the wheelchair, a maneuver that required more upper body strength than a pull-up. I had to learn how to use a slide board. I had to learn how to navigate a bathroom that suddenly felt like an obstacle course designed to humiliate me. I spent hours in the physical therapy gym, sweating through my shirt, gritting my teeth until my jaw ached, trying to push a wheelchair up a small wooden ramp. My arms burned, my palms blistered. Every time I failed, every time I rolled backward, I felt a flash of rage so hot it made me dizzy. One afternoon, a nurse named Marjorie found me crying in the hallway. I wasn't crying loudly. I was just sitting there, staring at the wall, tears leaking out of my eyes because I had dropped my water bottle and couldn't reach it. Marjorie was a woman in her 60s with forearms like a dock worker and eyes that had seen every tragedy a war could produce. She picked up the bottle and handed it to me. She didn't pat my head. She didn't say it would be okay. She looked at the phone sitting on my lap, which had remained silent for days, and then she looked at my face. "Honey," she said, her voice rough like sandpaper, "we can fix muscles easier than we can fix families." She knew. She had seen it 1,000 times. The guys whose wives stopped visiting, the girls whose parents stopped calling when the glory faded and the caretaking began. She saw the truth I was trying to ignore. That night, I made a decision. I needed to rip the bandage off. I needed to know where I stood. I wheeled myself over to the mirror on the wardrobe door. I looked at the reflection. The woman staring back at me looked like a stranger. My hair had been chopped short to keep it out of the way of the surgical halo I had worn for the first week. There were dark purple bruises under my eyes that looked like thumbprints. My shoulders were still square, still broad, but below them, the wheelchair dominated the frame. I was not wearing my dress blues. I was not wearing my camis. I was wearing a gray t-shirt issued by the hospital and a pair of sweatpants that hid the atrophy beginning in my legs. No medals, no ribbons, just me, just the wreckage. I raised my phone and took the picture. It was raw. It was ugly. It was the truth. I opened the family group chat. It had been dormant since I stopped replying to the loan requests 3 weeks ago, the 3 weeks I had spent fighting for my life. I attached the photo. My thumb hovered over the send button. My heart was hammering against my ribs harder than it had during any firefight. I typed a caption, keeping it short, trying to sound like the stoic soldier they expected. Back stateside. Rehab is going okay. I hit send. Then I waited. I sat in the dark, the blue light of the screen illuminating my face. I wanted them to say something real. I wanted my mother to say, "Oh my God, Kinsley, we are so glad you are alive." I wanted my father to say, "We are proud of you. Kid, focus on getting better." I wanted my brother to ask if I needed anything. I stared at the screen for 10 minutes, then 20. The 3 dots appeared, bubbled, and vanished. They were typing. They were deleting. They were talking to each other, coordinating their response. Finally, the phone buzzed. It was my father. "You better not expect us to take care of you. We do not have the space or the money to retrofit the house for a cripple." I stared at the words. They did not make sense. I had not asked to come home. I had not asked for money. I had just shown them I was alive. Before I could process the cruelty of it, another message popped up. This one was from my mother. "You still have your savings." Right? The military pays out for injuries like this. And then, the final blow. Logan, my little brother, the boy whose truck I had bought, whose debts I had paid, simply double-tapped our father's message. A little heart icon appeared next to the sentence about not taking care of me. He liked it. He liked the rejection. There was no, "How are you?" There was no, "I love you." There was no, "I am sorry." I sat there in the silence of the rehab center. The air conditioner hummed. A cart rattled down the hall. My phone screen dimmed and went black, but the words were burned into my retinas. I slowly lowered the phone to my lap. I expected to feel angry. I expected to want to throw the phone through the window, but I did not feel rage. I felt a cold, heavy numbness settling into my chest, expanding outward until it met the silence in my legs. It was a new kind of paralysis. This wasn't nerve damage. This was clarity. For years, I had convinced myself that their demands were just their way of leaning on me because I was the strong one. I thought I was the pillar holding up the roof, but looking at those messages, seeing the naked greed and the utter lack of empathy, I realized I wasn't a pillar. I was just a wallet. And now that the wallet was in a wheelchair, they were terrified it might stop opening. They looked at that photo of their broken daughter and they didn't see pain. They saw a liability. They saw a spreadsheet with a negative balance. I whispered into the dark room, my voice cracking just a little. That was the moment I realized the blast didn't just happen in the desert. It was waiting for me at home, too. The IED in Afghanistan had taken my legs, but the explosion on my phone screen had just taken my heart. And unlike my spine, I knew that damage was permanent. There would be no rehab for this. There would only be the long, cold work of cutting the dead weight loose. Driving the modified sedan felt less like operating a vehicle and more like piloting a strange, ground-based aircraft. The hand controls were mounted to the steering column, a sleek array of levers that had replaced the pedals my feet could no longer feel. Push forward to brake, pull down to accelerate. It was a binary language of motion that I had spent the last 4 weeks mastering in the hospital parking lot. But out here on the open highway, it felt alien. My hands, which used to hold rifles and pull squad mates out of burning trucks, were now the only things keeping me from veering into the drainage ditch. I left the Riverside Veteran Recovery Center at 10 in the morning. By noon, the landscape had shifted from the sterile, manicured suburbs of the medical district to the flat, gray expanse of rural Indiana. Driving back to Maple Ridge did not feel like a homecoming. It felt like I was crossing a border into hostile territory. Only this time, I did not have a briefing packet or extraction plan. The town appeared on the horizon like a smudge of dirt on a clean windshield. Nothing had changed. That was the first thing that hit me, the aggressive stagnation of it all. I passed the old Sunoco gas station where I used to buy slushies after track practice. The sign was still missing the letter O, just like it had been 10 years ago. I passed the billboards for divorce lawyers and injury attorneys. Their colors faded by the sun to pastel shades of desperation. The barns were leaning precariously to the left, their red paint peeling away to reveal the gray, rotted wood underneath. It was as if the entire town had been preserved in amber. But the amber was made of poverty and bad decisions. The only thing that had changed in this picture was me. I was returning as half the person I used to be, driving a car I could not step out of. I turned onto our street. The asphalt was cracked, the potholes filled with muddy water from a recent rain. I navigated the sedan carefully, my knuckles white on the steering knob. Then I saw the house, the Graham family home. I had sent them $40,000 over the last 3 years specifically for home repairs. I had wired money for a new roof. I had wired money for siding. I had wired money to fix the drainage in the yard, but as I pulled into the driveway, the house looked like it was rotting from the inside out. The shingles were patchy and curled like dead leaves. The gutters were sagging, choked with debris, dragging the fascia board down with them. The front yard was a jungle of knee-high crabgrass and dandelion weeds. And there, tucked under the windshield wiper of my father's Ford F-150s, was a bright pink slip of paper. Even from the driveway, I knew what it was, a final notice, a collection attempt. I turned off the engine, The silence in the car was heavy. I sat there for a moment, staring at the house that my money was supposed to be saving. It looked tired. It looked defeated. I opened the driver's side door and began the process. Assemble the chair, lock the wheels, slide board, transfer. It was a clumsy, undignified dance, but I did it. I slammed the car door shut and wheeled myself toward the front porch. There was a wooden ramp leading up to the door. I stopped at the bottom of it, my hands gripping the push rims. I remembered building this ramp. I was 17 years old. Our next-door neighbor, Mrs. Higgins, had broken her hip, and her insurance would not pay for a ramp. My father had said it was not our problem, but I had stolen lumber from a construction site and spent a weekend measuring, cutting, and drilling until Mrs. Higgins could get her wheelchair inside. I touched the weathered handrail. I had built this for an old woman because I wanted to be helpful. I never imagined that 15 years later, I would be the one dragging myself up the incline, paralyzed by a war my neighbors only saw on the news. The irony tasted like copper in my mouth. I pushed myself up. The wood creaked under the rubber tires. I reached the door and knocked. I did not have a key anymore. I had not had a key in years. It took 2 minutes for the door to open. My mother, Dana, stood there. She was wiping her hands on a stained dish towel. She looked older than I remembered, her face drawn and pinch-mouthed, but her eyes were the same. They were sharp, calculating eyes that scanned the world for threats and opportunities. She looked down at the wheelchair. Then she looked up at my face. There was no gasp. There were no tears. There was no dropping of the towel to rush forward and embrace the daughter who had almost died. "Oh," she said. The word hung in the air, flat and cold. "You made it." She stepped back, holding the door open, not to welcome me, but to get out of the way of the wheels. It was the same tone she used when the grocery delivery arrived earlier than she expected. "Hello, Mom," I said. My voice sounded rusty. She turned and walked back toward the kitchen without waiting for me to enter. I pushed myself over the threshold. The transition strip bumped my spine, sending a jolt of dull pain up my back. My father was in the living room. He was sitting in his recliner, the same one he had sat in for 20 years, watching a rerun of a fishing show. He did not stand up. He did not look away from the screen immediately. "You could have called." He grunted. I stopped the chair in the middle of the rug. The carpet smelled of stale cigarette smoke and wet dog. Though we did not own a dog. I texted the group chat. "Dad," I said, "I told you I was discharged today." He finally looked at me. His eyes drifted over the wheelchair with a look of distaste, as if I had tracked mud into the house. "We did not think you meant today," he said. "We have not had time to clean up. It is rude to just show up without a proper warning. Kinsley, we have lives too, you know." I stared at him. I had been blown up. I had spent months learning how to not soil myself. I had driven 3 hours with hand controls, and my father was lecturing me on etiquette because I had interrupted his fishing show. "I am sorry my survival is an inconvenience," I said. The sarcasm flew right over his head. Before he could respond, there was a thumping sound on the stairs. My brother, Logan, came down. He was holding a bowl of cereal, slurping milk as he walked. He stopped on the bottom step when he saw me. He was wearing my hoodie. It was a maroon sweatshirt from my high school track team. It had Graham embroidered on the back. I had earned that hoodie breaking the state record for the mile run. It was one of the few things I had left in this house that meant something to me. Logan looked at me, then at the chair, then back at his cereal. "Didn't know you were coming," he said, his mouth full. He walked past me, brushing against my wheel, and flopped onto the sofa. He did not ask how I was. He did not ask about the legs. He picked up the remote and turned the volume up on the TV, drowning out the silence in the room. I gripped the rims of my chair until my knuckles hurt. I needed to get away from them. I needed a moment to breathe. "I am going to my room," I said. I turned the chair around and headed down the hallway. The hallway was narrow, barely wide enough for the chair. I scraped my knuckles on the doorframe as I passed the bathroom, skinning the leather of my gloves. I reached the door at the end of the hall. My room. the sanctuary I had dreamed about when I was sleeping in dirt holes in Kandahar. I reached up and turned the knob. The door swung open. I froze. My bed was gone. My desk was gone. My posters, my books, my trophies, everything was gone. In their place was a weight bench, a rack of dumbbells, a heavy bag hanging from a hook in the ceiling. The floor was covered in foam mats. The room smelled of old sweat and vanilla protein powder. Stacks of cardboard boxes were shoved into the corner, and on top of them sat a giant tub of muscle supplements. This was not my room anymore. It was Logan's gym. I scanned the walls, looking for any trace of myself. There was one thing. High up on the wall, crooked and covered in a thick layer of gray dust, was a framed certificate. It was a commendation for my first tour. The glass was cracked. I felt a burning sensation in my throat. I turned my chair around. My mother was standing at the end of the hallway, watching me. "Where is my stuff?" I asked. My voice was quiet, dangerous. She shrugged. One shoulder went up, one went down. It was a gesture of absolute indifference. "You left. Kinsley," she said. "We needed the space. Logan needed a place to work out. He gets depressed if he does not exercise. We thought you would not need kid things anymore. You were gone. We did not know if you were coming back. You sold it," I asked. "Some of it," she said. "We threw the rest out. The books were moldy. The clothes were out of style. Why does it matter? You are a grown woman. You do not need high school yearbooks. It matters because it was mine." I said, "Well, it is gone now," she said, turning back to the kitchen. "Do not be dramatic. We will figure something out for tonight." That night, figuring something out meant a thin foam camping mattress thrown on the floor of the living room. My father said they couldn't move the weight bench out of my old room until the weekend because it was too heavy. Logan said he couldn't give up the couch because he had a back issue that flared up if he didn't sleep elevated. So, the veteran with the spinal cord injury was put on the floor. Getting down there was a humiliation I will never forget. I had to lock my chair, slide my body off the seat, and lower myself using my arms, inch by painful inch, until my hips hit the thin foam. The impact sent a shockwave through my lower back that made white spots dance in my vision. My mother tossed a blanket at me. "Temporary," she said, "just until we sort things out." She turned off the lights and went to her bedroom. My father followed. Logan went upstairs. I lay there in the dark. The house was quiet, but it was a noisy kind of quiet. The refrigerator hummed. The floorboards settled. Outside, a car drove past, its headlights sweeping across the ceiling, illuminating the cracks in the plaster. I could feel the hard floor through the foam. My legs were dead weight, splayed out in front of me. My back throbbed with a dull, rhythmic pulse. I was lying on the floor of the house I grew up in. I was lying on the floor of the house I had paid to repair. I was lying on the floor while my brother slept in my room and my parents slept under a roof I had kept over their heads. I closed my eyes, but sleep was miles away. I listened to the sounds of them sleeping. The faint snore from my father's room, the creak of the bed upstairs as Logan rolled over. They were sleeping soundly. They were not worried. Why would they be? Kinsley was home. The bank account was back within reach. The signature was in the building. In the desert, when we set up a perimeter, we knew exactly where the threats were coming from. We knew that anything outside the wire was hostile, and anything inside was safe. We slept with our rifles, but we trusted the person on watch. Here, lying on the dusty carpet, I realized that the perimeter was gone. The wire had been cut. I pulled the thin blanket up to my chin. It smelled like mildew. In Afghanistan, at least you know who is on your side, I thought, staring into the blackness of the living room. At home, the enemy shares your last name. 3 a.m. is a specific kind of hell when you are sleeping on a floor. The foam pad my mother had begrudgingly tossed down was less than an inch thick, and it did nothing to shield my fused spine from the hardwood underneath. Every time I shifted, a bolt of electricity shot from my lower back down to the phantom nerves in my legs. But it was not the pain that woke me up. It was the smell. Down here, with my face pressed near the carpet, the scent of the house was overwhelming. It smelled of wet dog, stale cigarette smoke, and a deep, pervasive mildew that seemed to rot the air itself. I lay there, staring into the gloom of the living room, listening to the house settle. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen. The wind rattled the loose siding outside. But then, under the ambient noise, I heard something else. Voices, low, urgent, and coming from the direction of my parents' bedroom down the hall. My first instinct was to ignore it. I was exhausted, physically depleted from the drive and the humiliation of the day. But the tone of the voices was familiar. It was the tone of a squad leader realizing the perimeter has been breached. It was the sound of panic trying to disguise itself as strategy. I pushed myself up. My triceps flared with the effort as I dragged my torso onto the seat of my wheelchair, which I had parked next to the makeshift bed. It was a silent, agonizing transfer, but I managed to lock the brakes and haul myself up without making a sound. I was not doing this to be a snoop. I was doing it because, in the field, you learn that information is the only ammunition that matters. If my family was holding a war council at 3 a.m, I needed to know the objective. I unlocked the brakes. The rubber tires of my chair were designed for indoor courts and hospital corridors. On the worn carpet of the hallway, they were ghost silent. I rolled forward, inch by inch, keeping my weight centered so the frame would not creak. I stopped just outside their door, which was cracked open a sliver, spilling a blade of yellow lamplight onto the floorboards. I held my breath. My heart rate slowed. I became a recording device. She has to sign. Dana, we are out of options. It was my father. His voice was tight, strained, lacking the bluster he usually carried around like a shield. I heard the rustle of paper. I know she has to sign, my mother hissed back. Her voice was lower, sharper. But you saw her face today. She is different. She is not the same soft kid who left. She looks at us like she is inspecting us. She is still our daughter. My father said, she still wants approval. I saw it in her eyes when I mentioned the house needed work. She feels guilty for leaving us here while she went off to play hero. Just guilt her. My mother whispered, she has always felt like she owed us for letting her go in the first place. Use that. Tell her the stress is killing me. Tell her the doctor said my heart cannot take a foreclosure. Make her feel like if she does not sign, she is the one pulling the trigger. I felt a cold shiver run down my neck. They were not discussing a financial problem. They were discussing a psychological operation. They were planning to weaponize my own love against me. Then, a third voice chimed in. It was Logan. He must have slipped into their room while I was struggling on the floor. She is going to see the credit card statement eventually. He said. He sounded bored, annoyed that this was keeping him up. We can handle the credit card, my father snapped. It is just a few thousand. It is 15,000, Dad, Logan corrected. And the collections agency has been calling my cell. I used her social security number because you said it would help build her credit history while she was deployed. I was doing her a favor. I needed that gear for the delivery business. It is not my fault the business folded. I gripped the rims of my wheels so hard, I thought the metal would bend. My brother had stolen my identity to fund a startup that never started, and he was framing it as a favor to me. That is small potatoes, my father said, dismissing the felony fraud like it was a parking ticket. The real problem is Harborview. If Harborview Lending finds out she is back, and we have not secured the signature on the second mortgage, they are going to accelerate the loan. They will not find out. My mother said, not if we get her to sign the ratification papers tomorrow. We just tell her it is paperwork for her VA benefits or something, or tell her it is to put the house in a trust to protect it. She does not understand civilian finance. She has been living in a tent for 10 years. But the signature, Logan said, the one on the original application, it does not match what she signs now. It matches the scan we used. My father said, I traced it off that birthday card she sent 3 years ago. It is close enough. The bank does not care. They just want their interest payments. I sat there in the dark, my mouth tasting like ash. They had forged my signature. They had taken out a second mortgage on a house I had already paid to repair. They were not just bad with money. They were criminals. And they were my criminals. But it was what my mother said next that truly stopped my heart. "Look," she said, her voice taking on a practical, chilling cadence. "She is single. She has no kids. She is never going to have a normal life now. Not in that chair. Who is going to marry a cripple? That disability check is just sitting there. She has thousands coming in every month from the government. She does not need all of it. She can help her family. It is the least she can do after everything we sacrificed to raise her." I stopped breathing. I literally stopped breathing. To my mother, my legs were not a tragedy. They were an asset reduction that increased my liquidity. My solitude was not a source of pain. It was a justification for theft. She viewed my life as a surplus budget that she was entitled to reallocate. "Wait," Logan said. "What about the LLC?" My ears perked up. "LLC. We keep that quiet," my father said quickly. "The Graham Family Acres LLC is the safety net. If the house goes, we have the business loans, but everything is in her name." "Dad," Logan said, "you registered the company with her credentials. You listed her as the sole proprietor so we could get the veteran business grants. She does not need to know that." My father said, "As long as she signs the tax forms next month, we are clear. We can use the business line of credit to pay the mortgage, and use her disability check to pay the business line. It is a cycle. Logan, it works." I felt like I had been punched in the gut. They had not just taken loans. They had created a shell company. They had built an entire financial ecosystem based on my identity, my veteran status, and my credit score. I was not just a co-signer. I was the unwitting CEO of a fraud ring. What if she says no? Logan asked, "What if she gets smart?" There was a pause, a long, heavy silence that stretched out from the bedroom and wrapped around my throat. Then my father spoke, his voice low and ugly. "She just came back from a war zone. Logan, she was blown up. Her brain got rattled. If she starts making trouble, we tell the bank she is unstable. We tell the relatives she is having episodes, PTSD, paranoia. We tell them she does not remember signing the papers because of the medication she is on. Who are they going to believe, the loving parents who took her in, or the brain-damaged soldier who is off her meds?" My vision blurred, not with tears, but with a red, hot clarity. They were willing to destroy my sanity to save their credit score. They were willing to paint me as broken, as crazy, as incompetent, just to keep the money flowing. They were plotting to gaslight me into a mental institution if I dared to ask where my money went. I had heard enough. I slowly, carefully, began to roll the chair backward. I needed to get away. If I stayed there 1 second longer, I would roll into that room and scream. I would flip the table. I would tear the house down around them. And that is exactly what they wanted. They wanted the emotional reaction. They wanted the crazy daughter. If I screamed, I proved them right. I reversed down the hall, keeping the wheels perfectly straight. I rolled past the bathroom, past the kitchen, back into the living room. I transferred myself back onto the foam mattress on the floor. The pain in my back screamed as I hit the ground. But I welcomed it. The pain was real. The pain was honest. Unlike the people in the bedroom, I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling fan blades that were barely visible in the moonlight. My hands were shaking, but my mind was icy still. For the first time since the explosion, the fog in my head cleared completely. The grief was gone. The longing for approval was gone. The little girl who wanted her daddy to be proud of her had died in that hallway. In her place lay a senior analyst for the Maritime Strategic Response Group. I began to categorize the intelligence I had just gathered. Target 1, unauthorized credit card access. Target 2, mortgage fraud via forged signature. Target 3, identity theft for the creation of a fraudulent LLC. Target 4, conspiracy to commit medical defamation. This was not a family dispute. This was an enemy operation, and I was behind enemy lines. I realized then that I could not confront them in the morning. If I confronted them now, they would scramble. They would hide the papers. They would destroy the evidence. They would launch the narrative that I was having a breakdown. I had no proof. I had no recording. I was just a cripple on a floor with a story no one would believe. No, I had to wait. I had to let them think they had won. I had to let them think I was the guilty, obedient, broken daughter they needed me to be. I would let them put the pen in my hand. I would let them show me the papers. I would let them dig the hole so deep that they could never climb out of it. I closed my eyes, visualizing the tactical map. I needed a phone. I needed a secure line. I needed the lawyer from the recovery center. I took a deep breath, inhaling the mold and the dust, and for the first time in months, I did not feel like a victim. I felt like a hunter. They thought they were planning a family bailout. What they were really doing was giving a special operations analyst a full briefing on their own crime. The sun was just beginning to burn the mist off the cornfields when I wheeled myself out onto the front porch. It was 7 in the morning. My back felt like a rusted hinge, and my legs were heavy, useless weights strapped to the chair. But the air outside was cleaner than the stagnant atmosphere of the living room I had just escaped. I held a mug of coffee that I had made myself, navigating the kitchen while my family slept, moving around the obstacle course of dirty dishes and unpaid bills they had left on the counters. I sat there, watching the road, letting the caffeine sharpen the edges of my mind. I was not just drinking coffee, I was calibrating. The intelligence I had gathered the night before the overheard confession about the forged signature, the secret LLC. The plan to paint me as mentally unstable was spinning in my head like a tactical map. I knew the enemy positions. Now I needed to know their supply lines. My phone buzzed in my lap. I looked down. It was a number I did not recognize, with a local area code. Usually, I would let it go to voicemail, assuming it was another debt collector looking for Logan or my father. But something in my gut, that same instinct that used to tell me when a roadside pile of trash looked wrong, told me to answer. I picked it up. "This is Kinsley," I said. My voice was flat, devoid of emotion. There was a pause on the other end. Then a man's voice, professional but tight, spoke up. "Ms. Graham, this is Marcus Reynolds from Harborview Lending. I apologize for calling so early, but I have a file on my desk that has been flagged for immediate review, and I needed to speak with you directly before the branch opens." I did not flinch. Harborview Lending, the bank my father had mentioned in the dark. "Go ahead." "Marcus," I said. He cleared his throat. I could hear the sound of papers shuffling in the background. "We received the ratification documents for the refinancing of the second mortgage on the property at 412 Maple Drive," he said. "Your father dropped them off yesterday afternoon. The loan officer who took them is new. But when the file came to me for final approval this morning, I noticed a discrepancy." He hesitated. He was trying to be polite, trying to dance around the accusation. I decided to cut the music. "What kind of discrepancy?" I asked. "Well, ma'am, the signature on the new documents looks significantly different from the signature we have on file for the original loan application from 2 years ago. And to be honest, neither of them matches the signature on your driver's license." I took a sip of coffee. It was bitter. "Marcus," I said, dropping my voice into the register I used when I was debriefing a detainee, "I want you to answer my questions very clearly. I am going to ask you 3 things, and I need the exact information from the file in front of you. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am," he said. He sounded surprised by the shift in authority. "Question 1, I said, what is the full name of the primary borrower listed on that loan? You are listed as the primary borrower. Ms. Graham, your parents are listed as guarantors. Question 2, I said, is there any other entity attached to this file? Yes, he said. The loan is secured against the equity of the home and the assets of a business entity, Graham Family Acres, LLC. I closed my eyes. The LLC, the shell company my father had invented to farm tax credits and loans. Question 3, I said, who is the registered agent for Graham Family Acres, LLC? You are, ma'am, Marcus said. It is listed as a veteran-owned small business, sole proprietorship under Kinsley Graham. The confirmation hit me harder than the coffee. I was not just a co-signer. I was the unwitting CEO of a fraud. My father had not just stolen my money, He had stolen my status. He had used the title I bled for veteran to secure low-interest loans for a business that did not exist. I took a breath. I looked at the peeling paint on the porch railing. "Marcus," I said, "listen to me carefully. I did not sign those documents yesterday. I did not sign the application 2 years ago. And I have never authorized the creation of an LLC in my name." The silence on the other end was heavy. I could hear Marcus breathing. "Okay," he said. His voice had lost the customer service sheen. It was serious now. "Okay, that is what I was afraid of. I am formally notifying you of identity theft and fraud." I said, "I want you to freeze that file. Do not process the ratification. Do not release any funds. And I want you to scan every document you have with my name on it and email it to me immediately." "I can do that," he said. "I will flag it as fraud right now. Thank you." I said. I was about to hang up when Marcus spoke again. His voice was softer this time, less like a banker and more like a human being. "Ms. Graham, I saw in the file that you served with the maritime group." "Yes." I said, "I was Navy." He said, "Logistics. Not special ops like you. But I did 2 tours. I waited. I knew what was coming. The code. The check-in. If this is happening inside the house," he said, choosing his words carefully. "Are you safe there? Ma'am, do you need assistance?" My throat tightened. A stranger at a bank, a man I had never met, was showing more concern for my safety in a 5-minute phone call than my family had shown since I rolled through the door. He understood. He knew that sometimes the threat is not a guy with a gun. Sometimes it is the people who claim to love you. "I am secure for now." "Marcus," I said, "but thank you. Just send the files." I hung up. I stared at the black screen of the phone. Secure. That was a lie. I was not secure. I was trapped in a house with 3 people who viewed me as a resource to be harvested. But I had the intel now. I had the confirmation. I heard the front door open behind me. "Morning. Kinsley." It was my mother. She was wearing her bathrobe, looking tired and fragile. The picture of a weary woman holding it all together. If I did not know better, I would have felt sorry for her. "Morning, Mom," I said. I turned my wheelchair around to face her. I forced a small, tight smile onto my face. "Who was on the phone?" she asked. She tried to make it sound casual, but her eyes were darting around, scanning my face for signs of trouble. "Just the pharmacy." I lied. "There was a mix-up with my pain medication. They need me to come into the city to sign some paperwork." "Oh," she said. She visibly relaxed. Her shoulders dropped an inch. "Just the pharmacy. Good. I thought maybe it was... Well, never mind. Breakfast is ready if you want some." I followed her into the kitchen. My father and Logan were already at the table. My father was reading the sports section, and Logan was scrolling on his phone. They looked normal. They looked innocent. It was terrifying how easily they wore the masks. I rolled up to the table. My mother put a plate of scrambled eggs in front of me. "So," my father said, not looking up from the paper, "we were thinking, since you are home, we should probably go over some housekeeping stuff later. Just some forms to make sure the house is protected. You know, in case anything happens to us." He was doing it. He was laying the trap. I picked up my fork. I stabbed a piece of egg. "Sure. Dad," I said, "we can look at it tonight. I have to go to Riverside today to sort out my meds." "Take your time," Logan said, his mouth full of toast. "No rush." I ate my breakfast in silence, watching them. I watched my father's hands, the hands that had forged my signature. I watched my mother's face, the face that had suggested guilt-tripping me was a valid strategy. I watched Logan, the brother who had stolen my social security number. They ate with hearty appetites. They had no idea that the person sitting across from them was not their daughter anymore. She was a recording device. She was an evidence collector. I finished my eggs, thanked my mother, and wheeled myself out to the car. The drive to the Riverside Veteran Recovery Center took 45 minutes. I drove with the windows down, letting the wind whip through the car, trying to blow the scent of that house off my clothes. When I arrived, I did not go to the physical therapy gym. I went to the administrative wing. to a small office tucked in the back corner. Eric, the social worker assigned to my case, looked up when I rolled in. He was a young guy, soft-spoken, with a desk piled high with paperwork. Sitting next to him was a woman I had not met before. She was sharp-featured, wearing a suit that looked like it could cut glass, and she had a legal pad on her knee. "Kinsley," Eric said, "you are back early. Is everything okay?" "No," I said. I wheeled into the room and shut the door behind me. "Nothing is okay." "This is Monica Reyes," Eric said, gesturing to the woman. "She is a volunteer attorney with the Veterans Legal Advocacy Group. She helps with benefits disputes, but I called her after you texted me this morning." Monica looked at me. She did not offer pity. She offered attention. "Tell me everything," she said. I told them. I told them about the text messages. I told them about the weight bench in my room. I told them about the conversation I overheard in the middle of the night. I told them about the call from Marcus at Harborview Lending. I told them about the LLC, the credit cards, the forged signatures, and the plan to label me as mentally incompetent if I fought back. I spoke for 20 minutes without stopping. I did not cry. I kept my voice steady, listing the facts chronologically, just like a mission report. When I finished, the room was silent. Eric looked horrified. Monica looked furious. But it was a controlled, professional fury. "This is textbook financial exploitation," Monica said. She capped her pen and leaned forward. "We see this more often than you would think. The family assumes the veterans' benefits are community property. They convince themselves they are entitled to it because they supported you while you were gone. But the LLC, the identity theft to create a business entity, that is a whole other level. That is systematic fraud. What do? I asked. Monica tore the top sheet off her legal pad and started a new one. "We go on the offensive," she said, "but we do it legally. We do not give them a chance to hide the money or destroy the records." She began to outline the plan, her voice clipping along like a metronome. "Step 1, she said. "We freeze everything. I mean everything. We put a fraud alert on your credit report with all 3 bureaus today. We contact the Social Security Administration and the VA to flag your accounts for potential theft. Step 2, she continued. "We get the full file from Harborview. We need those signature pages. We need to prove the forgery forensically. If we have the date of the signing, and we can prove you were in a hospital bed in Germany or a rehab center in Riverside on that date, their whole story collapses. Step 3, Eric added. You need to separate your finances completely. New bank account at a different bank. Direct deposit redirected immediately. Not a single penny goes into an account they can access." "And step 4, Monica said, looking me dead in the eye. "We send a cease and desist. We draft a formal legal notice demanding a full accounting of the LLC's assets and debts. We put them on notice that you are aware of the fraud. And if they try to intimidate you, if they try to touch you or threaten you, we file for an emergency protective order." I looked at the list she was writing. It was not a family therapy plan. It was a battle plan. "Can we get my name off the loans?" I asked. "That is all I care about. I do not want to send them to jail if I do not have to. I just want to be free. We can use the threat of criminal prosecution as leverage," Monica said. "If they agree to sell the house and liquidate the assets to pay off the debts in your name, we can offer a non-prosecution agreement. But Kinsley, you have to be ready for them to fight dirty. They have already shown they are willing to lie about your mental health. I am ready." I said. I spent the next 2 hours in that office. I signed affidavits. I made phone calls to credit bureaus. I redirected my disability payments to a new account I opened on my phone right there in the chair. I watched Monica draft the letters. She used words like felony fraud, misappropriation of funds, and criminal liability. They were heavy, violent words, but they were the only shield I had left. As I sat there, watching her type, I thought about the gear I used to carry. I thought about my rifle, my body armor, my radio. Those were the tools that kept me alive in the mountains. They were heavy, loud, and designed to destroy. But here, in this quiet office with the fluorescent lights humming overhead, those tools were useless. You cannot shoot a credit score. You cannot airstrike a forged signature. I looked at the pen in my hand. It was a cheap, plastic ballpoint pen with the Recovery Center's logo on it. I realized that this was my weapon now. This was how I fought back. I finished signing the last affidavit and handed it to Monica. "We will serve them with the papers," she said. "But you have to go back there tonight. You have to maintain the cover until we are ready to drop the hammer. Can you do that?" I thought about my mother's fake smile. I thought about my father's greed. I thought about the way Logan ate his toast while living on my stolen credit. "Yes," I said, "I can do it." I wheeled myself out of the office and back toward the car. The sun was high in the sky now, harsh and bright. I felt exposed, but I also felt lighter. The secret was not theirs anymore. It was mine. I rolled down the ramp, feeling the heat on my face. Out there, in the desert, I needed a rifle and a team to survive. Here, all I needed was a pen, a lawyer, and the courage to stop apologizing. The smell of pot roast hit me the moment I rolled through the front door. It was a thick, savory scent that used to mean Sunday comfort, but tonight it smelled like bait. My mother was in the kitchen, humming a tune that sounded frantic, chopping carrots with a rhythm that betrayed her nerves. The house was too warm. The thermostat had been cranked up, likely another attempt to make the environment feel welcoming, to simulate the warmth that had been missing from their hearts for years. I wheeled myself into the dining room. The table was set, and I mean, it was set. We were using the good china, the plates with the gold rims that usually stayed in the cabinet behind glass, waiting for a visit from the pastor or a funeral. The linen napkins were out, the water glasses were sparkling, and right there, at the head of the table where my father sat, was the centerpiece of the evening. It was not a floral arrangement. It was a stack of paperwork 3 inches thick, legal files, loan applications, refinancing drafts. They were neatly organized, with bright yellow sticky flags poking out from the edges, marking the pages that required a signature. My father was already seated. He was wearing a button-down shirt that was tight around the neck, his face flushed with a mixture of high blood pressure and anticipation. He looked up as I entered, forcing a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Sit down. Kinsley," he said, gesturing to the empty spot on his right, the spot where they had removed a dining chair to make room for my wheels. "We made your favorite." I maneuvered the chair into the gap. The table edge pressed against my stomach. I felt trapped, boxed in by the heavy oak furniture and the heavier expectations of the people sitting around it. Logan came down the stairs a moment later. He had actually combed his hair, though he was still wearing a sullen expression that suggested he was doing everyone a massive favor by being present. He sat across from me, avoiding my gaze, drumming his fingers on the tablecloth. My mother brought the roast out on a ceramic platter. She placed it in the center of the table with a theatrical flourish. "There," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "A proper family dinner. Just like old times." She sat down. We all looked at the meat. No one moved. "Let us pray," my father said. We bowed our heads, or at least, they did. I kept my eyes open, staring at the yellow sticky flags on the documents. "Lord," my father began, his voice dropping an octave into his church baritone, "we thank you for this food. We thank you for this roof over our heads. We thank you for the blessings of family and for the strength to get through hard times together. Guide our hands and our hearts as we make decisions to protect this home. Amen. Amen," my mother and Logan whispered. I felt a cold sneer curling in my chest. He had thanked God for the roof. He had thanked God for the food. He had even prayed for guidance on the decisions. But he had not said a single word about the fact that his daughter, who was sitting 2 feet away from him in a wheelchair, had survived a war. He did not thank God that I was breathing. He did not thank God that I had come home, because to him, my survival was not the miracle. My credit score was. We started to eat. The only sounds were the clinking of silverware on the fancy plates and the chewing of dry meat. The silence was not peaceful. It was pressurized. It felt like the air inside a submarine before the hull breaches. My father cleared his throat. He put his fork down and rested his hands on the table, right next to the stack of papers. "So," he started. He adopted the tone of a reasonable man discussing the weather. I know things have been a bit tense since you got back, Kinsley, and I know the house is not in the shape you remember. He sighed. A long, practiced exhale of martyrdom. Times have been hard, kid. The factory cut everyone's hours down to 30 a week. The price of gas is up. The price of food is up. And with Logan, well, Logan had some bad luck with his last employer. He didn't have bad luck. I thought he stopped showing up because he wanted to play video games. My father tapped the stack of papers with his index finger. We are in a bit of a bind, Kinsley. The interest rates on the original mortgage adjusted upward, and we fell behind. Just a little bit. But the bank, you know how banks are. They are predators. They want to take everything we have worked for. He pushed the stack of papers across the smooth wood of the table until it rested in front of me. But we have a solution, he said, his voice brightening. I talked to the guys at Harborview because of your service record and your disability income. We qualify for a restructuring. We can refinance the whole thing, lower the payments, and pull out a little equity to get Logan back on his feet. He pulled a pen from his shirt pocket. It was a nice pen, heavy, metal. All we need is for you to sign on as the primary borrower, he said. With your credit and benefits, we can keep the house. You just have to sign here, and here, and here. He pointed to the yellow flags. I looked at the papers. I saw the numbers. The principal amount was staggering. They weren't just refinancing. They were maxing out the equity. They were draining the house dry. My mother reached across the table and placed her hand on my arm. Her palm was warm, but her touch felt like ice. We are a family. Kinsley, she said. Her eyes welled up with tears that appeared on command. We are all we have, your father and I. We are getting older. We cannot work like we used to. We raised you. We spent 18 years making sure you had food and clothes and a safe place to sleep. She squeezed my arm. We took care of you when you were helpless, she said. Now that we are the ones who need help, it is your turn. It is the right thing to do. You do not want to see your parents on the street, do you? The manipulation was so blatant, it was almost impressive. They were framing 18 years of basic parental obligation as a loan that was now due for repayment. I stayed silent, looking at the papers. Logan, sensing that the pressure campaign needed one final push, leaned forward. Look, he said, stabbing a potato with his fork. It is not like you are using that money for anything else. You are single. You have no kids, no husband. You are just sitting on that government check. He chewed and swallowed. We are your real responsibility. Kinsley, what else are you going to spend it on? A new pair of running shoes. The insult hung in the air. Cruel and gross. He was telling me that because I was disabled and unmarried. My life had no value outside of what I could provide for them. I looked at Logan, then I looked at my mother, then I looked at my father. I slowly reached out and took the pen. My father's shoulders dropped 3 inches. My mother let out a breath she had been holding. Logan smirked and went back to his potatoes. They thought they had won. They thought the soldier had fallen in line. I held the pen over the first signature line. I hovered the tip just above the paper. Then I stopped. I looked up at my father, keeping my face perfectly still. So, I said, my voice calm and conversational, when exactly did you forge my name the first time? The room went dead silent. It was the kind of silence that follows a gunshot. My father froze. His smile twitched and died. My mother's hand fell off my arm as if she had been burned. What my father stammered, "What are you talking about? I am asking for a timeline." "Dad," I said, "I am curious. Did you forge my signature on the original loan application 2 years ago? Or was it before that? Did you practice it? Or did you just trace it?" "You are talking crazy," my mother hissed, her eyes darting to the papers. "You are on those meds. You are confused." I put the pen down on the table. It made a sharp click. "The bank was not supposed to call you yet," Logan blurted out. It was a reflex, a stupid, panic-induced slip of the tongue. He realized what he had said the second the words left his mouth. He slammed his mouth shut, but the damage was done. My father whipped his head around to glare at Logan, his face turning a shade of purple that was truly alarming. I reached into the side pocket of my wheelchair. I pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was the printout of the email Marcus had sent me that morning. It showed two images side by side, the signature on the loan application from 2 years ago, and my actual signature from my military ID. They looked nothing alike. One was sharp and jagged. The other, the forgery, was looped and shaky, like someone trying too hard to be elegant. I unfolded the paper and laid it on top of the roast beef, right in the center of the table. Harborview. Lending called me this morning. I said, I spoke to the fraud department. My mother gasped. She pressed her hand to her mouth. I told them I did not sign these papers. I continued, keeping my voice steady. I told them I was in a hospital bed in Germany on the date the original loan was originated. I proved it with my medical records. My father stood up. His chair scraped loudly against the floor. You called the bank, he roared. He slammed his hands down on the table, making the silverware jump. Are you out of your mind? Do you know what you have done? I know exactly what I have done. I said, I have initiated a fraud investigation. You ungrateful little traitor, he screamed. He pointed a shaking finger at me. We did this for you. We kept this family afloat. We built this business to support us all. And you go behind our backs. I went behind your backs, I asked, raising an eyebrow. You stole my identity. You opened an LLC in my name without my consent. You took out a second mortgage on a house I already paid to repair. We were going to pay it back, my mother cried. Tears were streaming down her face now, but they were tears of terror, not sadness. We just needed time. Why do you have to be so cruel? Why do you have to ruin everything? You ruined it when you decided I was a bank account instead of a daughter. I looked at Logan. He was pale, staring at the printout on the meat platter. I have frozen my credit. I said, I have contacted the Social Security Administration, and I have retained a lawyer who specializes in veteran financial exploitation. Lawyer, my father choked out the word. You got a lawyer against your own father? You left me no choice. I said, you were planning to declare me mentally incompetent if I did not sign. I heard you last night. The color drained from my mother's face. She looked at my father, panic wild in her eyes. Kinsley, honey, she stammered. You misunderstood. We were just worried about your stress levels. Stop it. I said, just stop lying. My father looked like he was going to come across the table at me. His fists were clenched. You are going to call that bank back right now, he growled. You are going to tell them it was a mistake. You are going to tell them you forgot you signed those papers. Or so help me God. Kinsley, or what I asked. You will hit me. You will throw me out. I gestured to the wheelchair. I have been blown up by the Taliban. Dad, do you really think a shouting match in a dining room scares me? Logan scoffed. He threw his napkin on the table. God, you are such a drama queen, he spat. Look at you, a drama queen in a wheelchair. You think you are so special because you got hurt. You are just selfish. You want to see us lose the house. I looked at my brother. I looked at the man who was wearing my high school hoodie, sleeping in my room, and spending the money I bled for. I do not want to see you lose the house, Logan. I said, I just refuse to be the fuel you burn to keep it warm. I unlocked the brakes on my chair. I backed away from the table. The stack of unsigned papers sat there, accusing and impotent. My father was breathing hard, staring at me with pure hatred. My mother was sobbing into her hands. Logan was looking at his phone, probably checking to see if his credit card still worked. You did not invite me to dinner, I said, my voice cutting through the room one last time. I looked at the pen lying on the table. You invited my signature, and she is not coming. I spun the chair around, my arms, strengthened by months of dragging my own dead weight, propelled me toward the door. I did not look back at the food. I did not look back at the family. I rolled out of the dining room, leaving them sitting in the ruins of their own greed, with the cold roast beef and the evidence of their crimes sitting between them. Behind me, the house was silent again, but this time, it was the silence of a bomb that had finally gone off. The packing did not take long. When your life has been reduced to a series of deployments and hospital stays, You learn to travel light. I went back to the living room, dragging my old military duffel bag onto my lap. I wheeled myself around the small pile of belongings that my mother hadn't thrown away or sold. It wasn't much, just a few faded photographs of my squad from before the blast, a worn-out copy of Catch-22 that I had carried through 3 provinces, and a small leather notebook where I used to write down grid coordinates and now wrote down pain medication schedules. I stuffed them into the bag, the zipper snagged, a harsh, rasping sound in the quiet house, but no one moved. My father was still sitting at the dining table, but he had turned his chair to face the television in the living room. He was staring at a rerun of a game show, the volume turned up just loud enough to drown out the sound of his daughter leaving. He didn't look at me. He stared at the screen with a fixed, glazed intensity, as if the price of a new washing machine was the most fascinating thing in the world. My mother was standing at the kitchen sink. The water was running. She was scrubbing a pot that was already clean, her shoulders shaking with silent, self-pitying sobs. She wanted me to go to her. She wanted me to roll over there, apologize for being mean, and promise to fix everything with a signature. She was waiting for the script to play out the way it always had. Logan was slumped on the sofa, bathed in the blue light of his smartphone. He was typing furiously, probably texting his friends about how his crazy sister was blowing up his spot. He didn't look up. He didn't offer to carry the bag. He didn't offer to open the door. The air in the room was thick with a specific kind of cowardice. It was the cowardice of people who feel entitled to your life, but are terrified of your reality. I wheeled myself to the front door. I balanced the heavy duffel bag on my thighs. The strap dug into my legs, but I couldn't feel it. I opened the door myself, maneuvering the chair back and forth to get the angle right. "Goodbye," I said. I didn't say it loudly. I didn't say it with anger. I just said it. No one answered. The game show host cheered. The water ran. Logan's thumb tapped against glass. I rolled out onto the porch and pulled the door shut behind me. The click of the latch felt final. It was the sound of a vault closing. Getting into the car was a battle. The driveway was gravel, and the small front casters of my wheelchair dug into the stones, threatening to tip me forward. I had to do a wheelie, balancing on the rear tires, to get to the driver's side door. My back was screaming. The spasms were starting in my lumbar region, hot, stabbing knives of pain that made my vision blur. I opened the car door and threw the bag onto the passenger seat. Then came the transfer. I locked the brakes. I positioned the slide board. I grabbed the handle above the door frame. I hoisted my body weight across the gap, gritting my teeth so hard I thought they might crack. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry, but I swallowed it all. I knew that if I made a sound, if I showed even a flicker of weakness, one of them might come to the window. They might see me struggling. They might see the sweat on my forehead. And they would take that image, the image of the helpless cripple, and use it to feed their narrative. They would tell themselves they were right to control me because I couldn't even get into a car. I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. I wouldn't give them one last drop of pity. I dragged my legs in, one by one, lifting them with my hands like dead wood. I collapsed into the driver's seat, panting, my heart hammering against my ribs. I waited for the spasms to subside. Then I started the engine. I didn't look back at the house as I backed out of the driveway. I put the car in drive, used the hand control to accelerate, and left Maple Ridge in the rearview mirror. The sun was setting, painting the sky in bruises of purple and orange. I drove for 2 hours without a destination, just needing to put miles between me and that dining room table. I merged onto the interstate, surrounded by semi-trucks and family minivans. Around 8 o'clock, my bladder signaled that it was time to stop. I pulled into a rest area just outside of Indianapolis. It was a busy place, brightly lit, filled with travelers stretching their legs and walking their dogs. I parked in a handicapped spot. I went through the whole process again, chair out, transfer, lock, push. I rolled toward the heavy glass doors of the main building. They were not automatic. I reached out to grab the handle, trying to figure out how to pull the heavy door open while simultaneously propelling myself through it. Suddenly, the door swung open. A woman was standing there. She was in her 50s, wearing a faded denim jacket and holding a leash with a small terrier attached to it. She smiled at me. It wasn't a pity smile. It was just a smile. "Go ahead, honey," she said. "Take your time." I rolled through. "Thank you," I said. "No problem," she replied. "Have a safe drive." She let the door close behind me and walked away toward the vending machines. I stopped in the middle of the lobby. People were walking around me, buying sodas, arguing with their kids, looking at maps. Life was happening. I felt a lump form in my throat that was bigger than the one I had felt leaving my parents' house. That woman didn't know me. She didn't know my credit score. She didn't know about my disability check. She didn't want anything from me. She just held a door because another human being needed to get through it. It was such a small, simple act of kindness. But after the Shark Tank of my family home, it felt devastating. It made me realize how warped my baseline had become. I had gotten used to love being a transaction. I had gotten used to help coming with an invoice. I went into the accessible stall, handled my business, and washed my face with cold water. I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked tired. I looked battered. But I didn't look owned. I got back in the car and called Eric, the social worker. He picked up on the second ring. I left. I said, "I need that apartment. I have the keys." He said, "Meet me there." The apartment complex was on the outskirts of Riverside, a row of single-story brick units built specifically for disabled veterans. It wasn't fancy. It was utilitarian. But when Eric opened the door to Unit 4B, I almost wept. The light switches were lower on the wall. The kitchen counters were cut out underneath, so I could roll my knees right up to the sink. The bathroom didn't have a tub. It had a roll-in shower with a sturdy, bolted-down bench and grab bars everywhere. There was no furniture yet, just empty space. "It is yours," Eric said, handing me the key. "The rent is subsidized. It comes directly out of your allowance, so you never have to worry about writing a check." I rolled into the middle of the living room. I spun in a circle. My wheels didn't catch on any rugs. My elbows didn't bump into any cluttered furniture. "It is perfect," I said. That night, I slept on the floor again, wrapped in my sleeping bag. But the floor felt different. It was clean. It was quiet. And nobody in the next room was plotting to steal my future. The next few days were a blur of forensic accounting. I spent hours in Monica Reyes's office, watching her peel back the layers of my family's financial abuse like a surgeon removing necrotic tissue. It was worse than we thought. Monica pulled up a credit report on her large monitor. "Okay, Kinsley," she said, pointing to a line item. "Do you own a Ford F-350 Super Duty truck?" "No." I said, "I drive a sedan." "Well, according to this, you bought one 18 months ago. The payments are $600 a month, and they are 3 months behind." My father, he had always wanted a big truck. And this Monica asked, scrolling down, $50,000 in a business loan for agricultural equipment upgrades for the LLC. I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "We live on a quarter-acre lot." "Monica, we do not have crops. We have a lawnmower." "They took out a tractor loan," Monica said, shaking her head. "They probably cashed out the loan and spent the money. Then came the credit cards. There was a commercial card opened in the name of the LLC. The statements were a roadmap of Logan's stupidity. Look at this." Monica said, "Coinbase, Binance, FTX. Thousands of dollars in transfers to cryptocurrency exchanges." "Logan," I said, "he calls it investing. He thinks he is a day trader. He is gambling with federal loan money." Monica corrected, "That is what this is. He took out business credit under a veteran's name and gambled it away on crypto." She looked at me. "We have them. Kinsley, this is wire fraud. This is bank fraud. This is identity theft. We have enough here to put your father and your brother in federal prison for 10 years. I looked at the screen. 10 years. I imagined my father in a jumpsuit. I imagined Logan crying in a cell. A part of me, the part that was still their daughter, flinched. But then I remembered the weight bench in my room. I remembered the conversation about declaring me insane. "I do not want them in jail yet." I said, "I want leverage. We will get it." Monica said. She laid out the strategy. We needed to be bulletproof. I started recording every phone call. When my mother called, weeping about how I had abandoned them, I let her talk. I asked questions. Why did you sign my name? Mom. I would ask. We had to. She would sob, her voice being recorded on the digital file. We needed the money. You were not there to do it. Gotcha. Confession recorded. I demanded the banks produce the proof of in-person verification for the loans. They couldn't. Harborview Lending scrambled. Realizing they had processed a mortgage without ever seeing the primary borrower's face, their negligence was my weapon. Systematically, I began to sever the limbs of the parasite. I went to the county recorder's office and filed an affidavit of forgery regarding the deed. I closed the joint checking account that my mother had helpfully kept open since I was 18. I opened a new account at a credit union on the other side of town. Protected by two-factor authentication and a password that was a random string of 30 characters, I changed my email passwords. I changed my VA login. I locked down every digital door in my life. But the real rebuilding wasn't happening on a spreadsheet. It was happening on Tuesday nights. Eric had suggested I join a peer support group at the center. I resisted at first. I didn't want to sit in a circle and talk about my feelings, but the silence in my empty apartment was getting loud. So I went. There were 8 of us, men and women, some missing limbs, some missing eyes, all missing pieces of the people they used to be. We sat in a circle of folding chairs, drinking bad coffee from styrofoam cups. A guy named Miller, not my Miller, but an older guy who had served in Vietnam was talking. He had a prosthetic leg and a tremors in his hands. My son, Miller said, looking at the floor. He waited until I went in for surgery. He took my debit card, said he needed to buy groceries for the house. He drained the account. $3,000, my disability back pay. He looked up, his eyes wet. He said he deserved it. Miller whispered, he said I owed him for being a bad father when I was overseas. The room nodded. A collective murmur of understanding rippled through the circle. I looked around. I saw the same pain on their faces that I felt in my chest. I realized then that I wasn't the villain. I wasn't the selfish daughter. I was part of a club that no one wanted to join, the club of veterans whose families viewed their service as a lottery ticket. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't tell the whole story. I just told them about the dinner. I told them about the roast beef and the unsigned papers. I joked. My brother thinks the Purple Heart comes with a cash prize. The group laughed. It was a dark, ragged sound. But it was real. One of the women, a Marine with a traumatic brain injury, looked at me and said, "You know you are allowed to say no, right? You are allowed to keep your own life." It sounds simple. But hearing it from someone who had walked through the same fire made it true in a way Monica's legal advice never could. I left the meeting that night feeling something strange. I felt lighter. The guilt that my mother had planted in me, the debt my father said I owed it, was dissolving. I drove back to my apartment. It was empty. It was quiet. I had no dining table, just a TV tray and a laptop, but the deed to the truck wasn't in my name anymore. The credit cards were frozen. The bank investigation was active. I sat in my wheelchair in the middle of my living room, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, my refrigerator, filled with food I had bought with my own money. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Logan. "You are ruining us. Dad is freaking out. Just sign the papers and come home." I looked at the message. A week ago, that text would have made me vomit with anxiety. Now it just looked like evidence. I took a screenshot. I saved it to the folder marked legal. And then I put the phone down. I didn't reply. I didn't apologize. I didn't explain. I wheeled myself into the bathroom and brushed my teeth at the low sink. I looked at my face in the mirror. The circles under my eyes were fading. The jaw was set. I thought about the house in Maple Ridge, the rotting siding, the peeling paint, the debt that was holding it up like termite-infested beams. I didn't burn their house down. I just stopped letting them build it on my back. And if it collapsed without me underneath it, that wasn't my fault. That was gravity. The conference room at the main branch of Harborview Lending was designed to intimidate. It was a glass box suspended on the second floor, overlooking the lobby where ordinary people waited in line to cash paychecks. The table was a slab of polished mahogany long enough to land a drone on, and the leather chairs cost more than the car I was currently driving. The air conditioning was set to a temperature that suggested the bank wanted to preserve us like cryogenic specimens. I sat on one side of the table, flanked by my team. To my left was Eric, my social worker, who looked nervous but resolute. To my right was Monica Reyes, my attorney. She was the calmest person in the room. She had arranged her files in a precise geometric grid, her pen capped, her hands folded. She looked like a predator waiting for a gazelle to stumble into the watering hole. Across from us sat the bank's legal team, 2 men in gray suits who smelled of expensive cologne and liability fear. And next to them were 3 empty chairs. Harborview had called this meeting after Monica had sent the initial wave of fraud alerts and demand letters. The bank's compliance department had gone into a panic. They realized they were sitting on a 6-figure unauthorized loan portfolio involving a disabled veteran. That is the kind of headline that gets bank managers fired and branches closed. They wanted a clarification meeting. Monica told me it was actually a trap, but not for us. It was a chance to let my family hang themselves on the record. The glass door opened. My parents and Logan walked in. If I had not known them, I might have felt a twinge of pity. They looked wrecked. My father, usually the picture of blue-collar pride, was wearing a polo shirt that was stained at the collar and wrinkled at the hem. His face was a map of sleepless nights, gray stubble covering his jaw. My mother looked smaller, her eyes rimmed with red, clutching her purse to her chest like a shield. And Logan looked like a ghost. He was pale, his hands shaking slightly as he pulled out a chair. He was not wearing my hoodie today. He was wearing a button-down shirt that was too big for him, probably borrowed from Dad, trying to look respectable. But despite their disheveled appearance, they carried an air of indignation. My father glared at me as he sat down, his jaw working. He looked insulted that he had been summoned here, as if I were the child who had broken a window and he was the parent coming to settle the bill. "Let us get started," the bank's lead attorney said. His name was Mr. Sterling. He did not offer anyone coffee. He picked up a remote and pointed it at the large screen on the wall. "We are here to discuss the outstanding liabilities under the name Kinsley Graham," Sterling said. "Specifically, the second mortgage on the property at 412 Maple Drive, and the business loans associated with Graham Family Acres, LLC. The screen flickered to life. It displayed a digital scan of a loan application. At the bottom of the page was a signature, Kinsley Graham. It was looped and swirling. Sterling cleared his throat. "According to our records, these loans were originated 18 months ago. The funds were dispersed to a joint account and then subsequently transferred to individual accounts held by Logan Graham and Dana Graham." He clicked the remote. A spreadsheet appeared. It showed the flow of money. $50,000 to a checking account, $15,000 to a crypto exchange, $10,000 to a car dealership. My mother let out a small, strangled noise. She looked down at her lap. My father leaned forward, resting his elbows on the mahogany. "Look," he said, his voice rough. "We know there are some paperwork issues. We were just trying to restructure the family finances. Kinsley was overseas. We were acting in her best interest. We intended to pay it all back. This is a family misunderstanding, not a bank matter." Monica uncrossed her legs and leaned forward. She did not look at my father. She looked directly at Mr. Sterling. "Mr. Sterling," Monica said, her voice cutting through the room like a scalpel. "I have a question regarding your verification protocols." Sterling stiffened. "Go ahead. On what date did your loan officer meet my client in person to verify these signatures?" Monica asked. The room went silent. The hum of the projector fan seemed to get louder. Sterling looked at his junior associate. The associate shuffled some papers, looking for a date that did not exist. "Well," Sterling said, adjusting his tie, "it is not always standard procedure to have a face-to-face meeting for a refinancing if the family is well known to the branch. Mr. Graham has been a customer here for 30 years. We assumed—" "You assumed," Monica interrupted. You assumed that when a signature appeared on a document transferring hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt onto a deployed soldier, that it was legitimate. You did not check a government ID. You did not require a notary present. Sterling's face turned a pale shade of pink. We were told she was unavailable due to training. My father interjected quickly. We told the loan officer she sent the papers by mail. Monica turned her head slowly to look at my father. You told them she sent them by mail, she repeated. Yes, my father said, jutting his chin out. She mailed them. I reached into the folder on my lap. I pulled out a thick document with a military medical seal on the front. I slid it across the smooth table until it hit Mr. Sterling's hand. That is my medical transfer record, I said. My voice was calm, almost bored. I pointed to the date on the loan application displayed on the screen. October 12th, I said, the day you say I signed that paper and mailed it from a training camp. I looked at Mr. Sterling. On October 12th, I was in a medically induced coma at Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany. My hands were strapped to the bed rails. My spine was being fused. I could not feed myself, let alone sign a mortgage document and find a post office. Sterling opened the file. He looked at the dates. He looked at the signature on the screen. Then he looked at my father with eyes that had turned from professional to hostile. This is physically impossible, Sterling whispered. My father's face went white. He started to stammer. Well, maybe I got the date wrong. Maybe she signed it before she left. I do not remember exactly. It has been a crazy year. It was not before she left. Monica said, the forms you used were not even created by the bank until 6 months after she deployed. We checked the revision dates on the bottom of the document. Panic started to set in on the other side of the table. You could smell it. It smelled like sweat and desperation. Logan, who had been staring at the table, suddenly spoke up. His voice was high and cracked. We had power of attorney, he blurted out. We had the right to sign for her. It was a verbal agreement. Kind of. She told us to handle things. Monica turned her gaze on him. It was like watching a wolf look at a rabbit. Can you produce that document, she asked? A notarized power of attorney. Or even a recording of this verbal agreement. Logan opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He looked at our father for help. But Dad was too busy staring at the table, watching his lies disintegrate. No, Logan whispered. My father slammed his hand on the table. It was a weak, hollow sound compared to the last time he had done it at the dinner table. This is ridiculous, he shouted, trying to summon his old authority. You people are the bank. It is your job to check this stuff. If you let us sign the papers, that is your fault. You cannot blame us for trying to save our house when you made it so easy. He was trying to shift the blame. He was trying to argue that because the bank was negligent, his crime did not count. Mr. Sterling stood up. He was done being polite. He was done protecting a 30-year customer. He was now protecting his institution. Mr. Graham, Sterling said, his voice icy. Are you admitting that you knowingly deceived our loan officers? Because let me be very clear. If you falsified those documents, Harborview Lending is not liable. You are, and we will cooperate fully with any criminal investigation initiated by Ms. Graham. The word criminal hung in the air. My mother burst into tears. It was not the soft, manipulative crying she used at home. This was a guttural, ugly sound of pure terror. She realized, finally, that this was not a family squabble. This was the end. Monica opened her notebook. She did not look at my crying mother. She spoke to the room. We are prepared to file a formal complaint with the Federal Bureau of Investigation for wire fraud and identity theft. Monica said, we are also prepared to file a civil suit for damages against all three of you individually. She paused to let that sink in. Wire fraud carries a sentence of up to 20 years in federal prison, she added casually. And since you use the mail and the internet to conduct these transfers, each transaction is a separate count. My mother grabbed my father's arm. Her fingernails dug into his shirt. Bob, she sobbed. Bob, do something. They are going to take the boys. She meant Logan. She was terrified they were going to take her 30-year-old son to prison. My father looked at me. For the first time, the anger was gone from his eyes. It was replaced by shock. He looked at the wheelchair. He looked at my face. He looked for the daughter he could bully, the girl who just wanted to be good. She was gone. "Kinsley," he croaked, "you would not do that. We are your blood." I looked at him. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It was not hate. It was pity. He looked so small. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the table. "You did not just gamble with my credit, Dad," I said. "You gambled with my freedom." I gestured to the screen, to the debts that totaled nearly $300,000. If those loans go bad under my name, I am the one who cannot rent an apartment. I am the one who loses my security clearance. I am the one who ends up homeless. I fought a war to secure a life for myself. You tried to steal that life so you could buy a truck and pretend you were rich. I looked at Logan. "You gambled with my survival so you could play day trader." I said. I sat back. "But I am not you." I said, "I do not destroy family for profit." Monica slid a new document across the table. It was thick, stapled, and legally binding. "We are offering a settlement," Monica said. My father looked at the document like it was a bomb. "What is it?" he asked. Monica listed the terms, ticking them off on her fingers. Number 1. You will list the house for sale immediately. The proceeds will be used to pay off the Harborview loan and the business debts in full. My mother gasped. "Sell the house. But where will we live?" "That is not our concern," Monica said coldly. "You can rent a manufacturing apartment, or you can live with relatives, but you cannot live in a house financed by fraud." Number 2. Monica continued, "You will sign a confession of judgment admitting to the forgery. We will hold this in escrow. If you violate any terms of this agreement, we file it with the court and send it to the district attorney. Number 3. You will dissolve the LLC immediately. And number 4, Monica said, looking at Logan, you are permanently barred from accessing any credit in Kinsley's name. If you ever attempt to use her social security number again, we go straight to the police. No warnings." My father looked at the papers. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold them. "If we sign this," he asked, his voice trembling. "No jail. If you sign this, and if the debts are paid in full within 6 months, we will agree not to press criminal charges," Monica said, "and Harborview has agreed to waive the fraud investigation provided they are made whole." Sterling nodded stiffly. "We just want our money back." The room was quiet. My mother was weeping softly into a tissue. Logan was staring at the wall, looking like he was about to be sick. My father stared at the settlement. He was looking at the end of his world. He was looking at the loss of his home, his truck, his status in the town. He would be just another renter. He would be a man who failed. He looked at me one last time. "Kinsley." He started. "Don't," I said. "Just sign." He picked up the pen. It was a cheap bank pen, not the nice metal one he had at dinner. He bent over the paper. I watched him sign his name. Robert Graham. Then he passed it to my mother. She signed through her tears, her hand wobbling. Then Logan signed. Monica took the papers back. She checked every signature. She checked the dates. She placed them in her folder and snapped it shut. The sound of the folder closing echoed in the room. It sounded like a gavel. I looked at them. They were slumped in their chairs, defeated. They had lost the house. They had lost the money. But they had lost something else. Something they didn't even realize yet. They had lost their victim. I unlocked the brakes on my wheelchair. "We are done here," I said. I backed away from the table. I turned my chair toward the door. "Wait," my mother called out. Her voice was weak. "Kinsley, are you coming home to pack the rest of your things?" I stopped. I didn't turn around. "No," I said. "Keep the things. Sell them if you need money for the move. I have everything I need." I rolled out of the glass room, past the stunned bank lawyers, past the lobby where people were depositing their honest paychecks. I rolled out into the sunshine of the parking lot. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. They were shaking from the adrenaline dump of a mission accomplished. I took a deep breath. The air smelled of exhaust and asphalt, but to me, It smelled like oxygen. I had entered that bank as a daughter. I left as a stranger, and for the first time since the explosion, I felt whole. 3 weeks after the meeting in the glass conference room, a for sale sign appeared on the lawn of the house at 412 Maple Drive. It was a small, white rectangle on a wooden stake, but in Maple Ridge, it screamed louder than a siren. In a town where everyone knows the balance of your checking account before you do, the news traveled fast. The Grahams were selling. The Grahams were downsizing. The Grahams were in trouble. The gossip mill started turning immediately. My phone, which I had kept on silent for days, began to light up with messages from relatives I had not spoken to in years. Aunt Martha, who had never sent me a care package while I was deployed, sent a long, blistering text accusing me of being cold-hearted. She asked how I could do this to my own parents, how I could kick them out of their home after everything they had sacrificed for me. Cousins I barely knew posted vague, passive-aggressive status updates on social media about the importance of loyalty and how money changes people. I did not reply to a single one of them. I did not defend myself. I did not explain that the sacrifice my parents had made was actually a series of felonies committed against their disabled daughter. I realized that explaining myself to people committed to misunderstanding me was a waste of ammunition. The for sale sign was not a tragedy. It was a consequence. It was the physical manifestation of a lie finally collapsing under its own weight. My parents moved out on a rainy Tuesday. They rented a 2-bedroom apartment in a complex near the interstate, about 10 miles outside of town. It was clean, functional, and completely devoid of status. There was no yard to neglect. There was no big driveway for a truck my father could not afford. It was a box for living, not a stage for performing a middle-class fantasy. Logan had to grow up the fastest, with the credit cards frozen and the business loans liquidated. His days of day trading crypto from the comfort of a leather sofa were over. He got a job at a distribution warehouse on the night shift. For the first time in his life, he was lifting boxes instead of lifting money from my accounts. He was sweating for his paycheck. He was paying rent. He no longer had the name of his big sister to use as a shield against the real world. From the window of my apartment at the veteran housing complex, I watched the world turn without my intervention. There was a flagpole in the center of the courtyard, and every morning at 0800, a volunteer raised the flag. Before, seeing that flag used to make me feel a complicated mix of pride and resentment, a reminder of the service that had cost me my legs and made me a target for my family. But now, watching the red, white, and blue snap in the wind, I felt something different. It did not represent a debt I owed anymore. It represented the ground I had stood on. It was a symbol that I had protected myself with the same ferocity I had once used to protect the country. The messages from my immediate family went through a strange evolution over those first few weeks. At first, they were angry. My father sent texts blaming me for his high blood pressure, for the shame of moving, for the loss of his dignity. Then, the anger turned to bargaining. My mother sent photos of old family vacations, trying to trigger a nostalgia that no longer worked on me. She would text things like, "Remember when we went to the lake? We were so happy then. We can be happy like that again if you just come visit." Finally, the silence set in, followed by the clumsy, terrified apologies. They were realizing that I was not coming back. They were realizing that the ATM was permanently out of order. Then, late one night, I got a text from Logan. It was short. It wasn't angry. It wasn't manipulative. It was just honest. I did not think it would go this far. I stared at the screen for a long time. He didn't think it would go this far. He thought he could steal my identity, ruin my credit, and mock my disability, and that I would just take it. He thought I would roll over because that is what Kinsley always did. He had underestimated the blast radius of a woman who has nothing left to lose. I did not reply. That was my revenge. I didn't scream at him. I didn't lecture him. I simply denied him the absolution he was looking for. I let him sit in the discomfort of his own actions. I let him go to work at the warehouse, lift those heavy boxes, and think about the sister he had betrayed every time his back ached. I stopped focusing on them and started focusing on the war in front of me. I enrolled in a vocational training program for veterans, specializing in cybersecurity and data forensics. It turned out that the hypervigilance I had developed in the field, combined with the crash course in financial fraud my family had forced upon me, made me naturally gifted at tracking digital footprints. I learned how to trace shell companies. I learned how to spot the patterns of embezzlement. I learned how to follow the money through the digital maze. I treated every case study like a mission. I wasn't just learning a trade. I was arming myself. I was making sure that no one, not a stranger, not a banker, and certainly not a relative, would ever be able to blindside me again. 6 months later, a twist of fate brought my journey full circle. One of my instructors introduced me to the director of a nonprofit organization called Vets Guard. They were a legal aid group dedicated to helping wounded warriors navigate the bureaucratic nightmare of benefits and recovery. They were looking for someone to head up a new initiative focused on family financial exploitation. They hired me on the spot. My job was to talk to veterans who were waking up in hospital beds, confused and medicated, and warn them about the predators who might be standing right next to their bedside holding a power of attorney form. I became the person I wished I had met when I first arrived at Riverside. One evening, I was asked to speak at a seminar for a group of Vietnam and Gulf War veterans. The room was filled with men and women in wheelchairs, some with prosthetics, some dealing with demons that didn't show up on an X-ray. I sat on the stage, the microphone clipped to my shirt, and I told them my story. I didn't use my family's real names, but I didn't soften the details. I told them about the forged signatures. I told them about the secret LLC. I told them about the dinner where they asked me to sign away my future over a pot roast. The room was dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. These were hardened soldiers, people who had seen the worst of humanity, but the betrayal of blood still had the power to shock them. Then, I got to the end of the story. I leaned into the microphone and said the words that had become my mantra. I told them to remove my name from every loan. I told them that my injury was not their winning lottery ticket. For a second, there was silence. Then, a man in the back row, a double amputee, started to clap. Then another. Then the whole room erupted. It wasn't polite applause. It was a thunderous, rhythmic validation. They were banging their canes on the floor. They were whistling. They were cheering. I sat there, letting the sound wash over me. It was the applause I had always wanted from my father. It was the "I am proud of you" I had begged for from my mother. But it was better, because it came from people who knew the cost. It came from my real family. I went home that night feeling a kind of exhaustion that was clean and satisfying. I made myself a cup of tea in my kitchen, the kitchen where every appliance was paid for with money I had earned, in an apartment where my name was the only one on the lease. I sat on my sofa and finally opened the folder on my phone where I kept the unread messages from my parents. There were dozens of them. I read them all, one by one. I saw the progression clearly now. I saw the fear in my father's texts about his credit score. I saw the shame in my mother's texts about the neighbors talking. I saw the panic in Logan's texts about his rent being due. They were suffering. They were struggling. And a small, old part of me, the part that used to mail checks from Kandahar, wanted to fix it. I could send them $500. It wouldn't break me. I could co-sign a small car loan for Logan so he didn't have to take the bus. But then I looked at my legs. I looked at the wheelchair parked by the door. I remembered the weight bench in my childhood bedroom and the plan to call me crazy. I opened the group chat. It had been silent for 2 months. I typed one final message. I do not hate you, but I will not be your backup plan again. If you want a relationship with me, it will never involve my money, my credit, or my guilt. We can talk about the weather, we can talk about the news, but the moment you ask for a signature, I disappear. Only honesty from now on. I hit send. I didn't wait for the 3 dots to appear. I didn't wait for the excuses or the accusations. I turned the phone over and placed it on the coffee table. The silence that filled the room wasn't empty. It wasn't lonely. It was the silence of a battlefield after the treaty has been signed. It was the silence of peace. I wheeled myself into the bedroom. I positioned the chair next to the bed. I locked the brakes. This was the hard part, the transfer. Even after months of practice, it was a physical battle. I planted my hands on the mattress. I engaged my core. I lifted the dead weight of my lower body, swinging my hips across the gap. My arms shook with the effort. My breath hitched in my throat. I landed on the bed. I dragged my legs up, straightening them out on the duvet. I was sweating, but I was there. I had done it myself. No nurse, no mother, just me. I lay back against the pillows and looked out the sliding glass door to the small balcony. The city lights of Riverside were twinkling in the distance, a grid of gold and white against the darkness. Somewhere out there, my family was sleeping in a rented apartment, learning how to survive on their own. Somewhere out there, a veteran was reading the pamphlet I had written, learning how to protect their pension. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cool air of the apartment. For the first time, my life does not belong to the military. It does not belong to my family. It does not belong to my debt. It belongs to me. They only ever asked about my money. They never thought I'd be brave enough to say no. Funny thing about coming home from a war in a wheelchair, you stop being afraid of who you might lose and start being afraid of losing yourself again. I chose me. That was my revenge. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and share your thoughts on my decision. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Maya Revenge Stories channel. Hit the like button and press the hype button to help this story reach more people who might need to hear it.